Hey guys, it's George at MGW. So here's our new Gen 2 shifter for the Mach 1 and the GT350. We're going to show the installation. Actually, it's going to be a kind of a hybrid video. We're real busy right now making shifters, which is what we do best. So we're going to cut and paste a lot of stuff from our Gen 1 install, because the removal of the factory unit on both our Mach 1 here and our GT350 we had is identical. So we're going to show that part in the beginning, and then we're going to actually jump into it and show this mounted right out here on the bench stand in broad daylight here, so you can see everything real clearly. And then we're going to cut into the car to show some of the install and detail inside the car. The big issue is out here, you can see everything and you don't get a lot of shadows and stuff from underneath the car. So it'll give you a really good idea of how simple this thing is to install. And then we'll show cuts actually in the car, putting the boot on and stuff like that. And we obviously have the reverse lockout procedure documented well as well. These are the tools that you'll need for the GT350 shifter install. We have an impact driver. You can also just use a ratchet and an extension. You're going to need an 18mm deep well socket. You'll need a 15mm deep well socket. You need a 1/2-inch ratcheting box wrench, a 10mm ratcheting box wrench. You're going to need a little trim tool. You're going to need a punch and a hammer. The punch is provided in the kit. You're going to need at least 10 inches worth of extensions for your ratchet. These are two 8-inch extensions. A 10-inch is sufficient though. You'll need a 1/4-inch drive ratchet. You're going to need a 1/2-inch deep well socket, a 10mm deep well socket, a 1/2-inch standard socket, a 7mm socket, a swivel for your 1/4-inch drive ratchet. You'll need a razor blade or a pair of scissors. Also not shown, in order to support the car and the jack, you're going to need to have jack stands or access to a lift, and you're also going to need a transmission support jack or a small little car jack with a 2x4 is sufficient as well.
You will also need a small flat blade screwdriver.
Make sure the car is parked on a level surface. Pull up the e-brake as far as it'll go and twist off the factory shift knob. As you can see, there's a tremendous amount of Loctite on the factory shift knob. It could get very difficult to remove it, so just be careful. You may have to use a rubber strap wrench or a rag to break it loose. Remove the passenger and driver's side panels by pulling from the top and working your way back, releasing the tabs. And then remove these two screws here, which have a 7mm hex head. Little tip here to keep these two screws on the side panel from getting lost. There's a little magnet here on the panel. Just let them stick to the pad for both the passenger side and the driver's side panel. Open the center glove box and, using a trim tool, pry up gently right in this area shown to get the tabs loose. And then do the same thing on this side. Just a little twist and lift motion. And work your hands up. Lift up carefully. Once you get the back done, just very carefully lift up, and it'll make some popping noises. It's okay. Once you get it up to about here, you need to reach underneath here. And on the GT350, there's only one disconnect. On the other 550s, there usually are two, but you only have to disconnect this one right here. Once you have it up to this point, if you can see up underneath here, we're going to actually push on the shift boot bezel from underneath. You'll see these little clips here. Just push, and I'll show you when I get it up. You're going to push on each one of them, and you're going to get the bezel loose. And carefully lift it up, and then you can turn it sideways and you can actually pull the console right around it. Put that down to the side. These are the clips here that you'll push at from underneath. It's a lot safer to do that than trying to pry it, because you could break these clips. So from underneath the console, like we talked about, just push on each one of them and this will pop out. Remove this sound pad and the OEM sound pad on the bottom here. Keep these because you will reuse these two pieces. Pull up the OEM rubber boot and remove it from the shifter body. Okay, we're going to take this roll pin out right here, so we need to take this little rubber spring guard off with a small little flat blade. Just be real careful, try not to tear it. Just slide it right up off of there. And take this little O-ring off as well. And you want to push this thing over to the left or the right, depending on which way is easiest for you. And using the little punch, we're just going to tap out the roll pin. Once the pin's out, go ahead and lift the spring up, remove it, and then this piece should come right off as well. Once we have this complete and everything's stripped off of the handle on the top, we're ready to lift the car up and access it from underneath. From underneath the vehicle, we're going to remove this part of the linkage arm. There are two U-shaped clips. There's one right here, and there's one on the driver's side right underneath the shifter. Just take a flat blade screwdriver and catch the top of the U here and pull it out. And here's the one on the driver's side. Just push up on it. Once you remove those two U-shaped clips, you can push the pin out to the passenger side and remove this pin. If you pull this down, next we're going to take the center shaft out by removing these two screws here. They're also 10 millimeter. It does help to have a swivel joint right at your socket because of the difficult angle. Just remove these two screws. Use caution when removing the second screw because the little ring plate will fall down with it. Make sure it doesn't hit you. Remove these two 6 millimeter hex nuts with a 10 millimeter deep well socket so you can drop the rear bushing bracket and remove it from the vehicle. Once the two nuts are removed, just pull down, and you will have a little panel nut up there and it'll slip, so pull down firmly and then slide the rear bushing bracket off of the shifter body. There we go. Okay. Once you have the two screws from underneath removed in the plate, it's very helpful to have somebody up top here just gently push down on the shifter, and that'll break it loose in the center here. And once it's loose, you can feed it down through the bottom of the shifter. At this stage, we need to lower the transmission a little bit to access the front bolt. So you want to put a support right forward of the drain plug, right at the heavy part of the casting. And you're going to take an 18 millimeter socket and remove the 4 outer bolts. Just want to slowly lower the transmission, just about maybe 2 inches, until it just starts to rest. But make sure that you give it support there. Don't let it hang freely. Just drop it down till it stops and then jack it up just a hair so it's got support. From the passenger side on top of the transmission, there's one bolt right here. It's a 10 millimeter hex head. We need to use a 10 millimeter ratcheting box wrench because there's very little movement here. So you have to have a ratcheting box wrench to make this workable. So it's difficult to see, so I'm just showing you where the bolt is. Just remove this bolt completely. Okay, once that bolt's out, pull on the shifter body and get it out of the notch in the front. And then you got to carefully manipulate it around the drive shaft so that you can get the rear pins to come up into the top oval cutout. And if you have somebody up on top that can grab it, you can feed it right up through the top of the car, like that. Once the aluminum cast body's out, we're going to take the linkage arm off. If you look up here, there's a bolt with a 1/2-inch hex right here. We need to remove that bolt and the linkage arm will come off. Notice this bolt only has about 1/4 inch of thread, so when you unscrew it a little bit, you actually have to pull the pin part of it out. You will reuse this bolt, so don't discard it. All right, once you remove this bolt, you can just pull the linkage rod right off of the transmission. Hey guys, all right, this is the new Gen 2 for the Mach 1 and the GT350. We're just gonna do a quick rundown of what you get. This shifter is so much simpler and easier to put in as far as the components. You have 4 separate components. You have the bridge assembly with the top arm. You have the main shifter, and then you have the rear pin bracket. Now, in some of the videos or the cuts that we show, where I was actually putting this thing down into the console with this bracket attached like this, I decided I'm going to leave that up to the customer. We took it off and we provide you with the 2 bolts, and we also provide an Allen wrench. So you can leave it off until you get this down into the tunnel. Makes it a whole lot easier. But as you saw in the video, you can get it in there. So we'll just leave that up to you. To install it, it's very simple. You just take these screws, which have nylon patches. We provide some blue Loctite too. You might want to put a little dab on there as well, but you're just going to put that in there and screw these things in there just like that. And we do, like I said, we do provide the little 1/4 inch Allen wrench. You'll want to do this from underneath the car. It'd be easier unless you want to tilt the shifter up like that through the console a little bit to get down in there, but it'd be much easier to get everything down in there and just reach around the drive shaft and put those in. Now we also, this is the shift handle, we also leave this off because when you put that boot around it and you're trying to get that boot around this groove, it's a lot easier when you don't have this handle, as I'll show here, sticking up in your way. It just goes in last. After you get everything in, get the boot on, obviously set your reverse lockout before you put the boot on and stuff. And as far as the shifter itself, it literally, and we'll go to the transmission in a few minutes and show you, but you literally mount this to the top arm bolt, just like the factory unit. This attaches to the actual transmission linkage. This slides up in here, and your 2 screws mount there. And on the other side, just remember, no matter which side you're on, always mount on the bottom holes. This arm is the same as this arm, so when it's flipped around, these bottom holes become the top holes over here. So as long as you're mounting to the 2 bottom holes on both sides, that's what you want to do, just like that. All right, and it's as simple as that. You're attaching it to the trans. That pin bolt is the same OEM one, you reuse it. So there's only 1 bolt to attach there. You got the 4 bolts to attach here, and then you got the long bolt, and let me grab that. Actually, I'll grab both of them here for you. That's the special pin bolt that you'll take out of the factory one, and that's what goes in here. And just make sure that you start that a few threads. It's a pretty fine thread, and pull on it, make sure it doesn't come out, and then you just screw it in tight. And then this bolt is the one that goes all the way up. So let's jump over to the transmission and we'll show how easy it is to put in. Okay, getting this in here is tricky because you have maybe a 1/16, if that, of clearance, and that's when you get it in properly. So just take your time. Don't try to jam it in and get it stuck. This is also very important. You have to have that transmission lowered just pretty much as far as you're comfortable doing, but keep support on it. Don't let it hang, but lower it down because otherwise you'll hit the drive shaft trying to get this in. So the key to it is to bend it a little bit so that you shorten it up and get it in first. And we're going to put it on the driver's side of the drive shaft. And we're going to go all the way down and we're going to rotate it. See how I'm doing it? It's like this. And we're going to rotate it in. And then you have to get all of that stuff underneath the front here. You got your reverse lockout bracket. So you have to move it around, get it all the way in, and then you have to deal with the pins. So you got to get it rotated now. Get this thing lifted back up. It wants to get caught on some stuff. Rotate it in and just get one of those pins. Actually, let's pull it up over to the driver's side again. There we go. So we'll get it in, and there you go. So it's a little tricky, but as you can see, it goes in. You just got to make sure, if you can see way down in there, you got to make sure that that part's out here in that open area to allow you to rotate. If you get jammed up, like up on this thing, you're not going to be able to manipulate the whole unit. And as you can see, it's just very, very little room to move. Try to get it back in or get it back out. You can see I got it out now. So it's not much, but it does go in. So just take your time. I've done about 20 installs in and out on my Mach 1, so I know it goes in. Okay, we're going to show installing this on the transmission. As you see, we went ahead and put the rear pin bracket on. Obviously, like I said, this is optional. Once you get it down into the console, into the tunnel, you can lay it on the drive shaft. This will all be lowered down, so you'll be able to clear this. Now, you do want to remove this. We have it just mounted here because it's easy for us to slide it on, but you're going to take this off. This is the factory OEM rear pin supports. So you're going to take this off. You'll actually slide them on the pins and then lift the whole unit up, and the car actually has studs that stick down. We have bolts on our trans stand, but it'll have studs that stick down and the nuts, and we have nylon lock nuts that go in. But basically that's how it mounts, is it slides right in there. And then if you pan to the front here, it's just simply look inside there, and you just line that up. You just kind of wiggle it. And like I said, you want to get it in there and start it a couple turns and pull on it hard to make sure that it's in there. Do not cross thread that. That'll be really bad and give you a bunch of headache doing. So we've got this on there, and then you're just going to, and obviously from under the car, you won't be up like this. You'll be working from down below. So you'll just, and you also want to put some blue Loctite, just a couple drops on that bolt. And we provide all of that. It's all in the kit. And another thing to mention, don't mess with any of these. These are all Loctited. They're all clamped in. The only thing you have to worry about is just the attachment point right at the transmission. So we get that tight. And you see this joint allows articulation so it doesn't bind on you. Okay, so once that's mounted, you can see that that's pretty much 80% of the work. We just have to put the top arm on and attach it to these two bolts, and that's it. Obviously, like I said, you want to have everything drop down. This transmission, the cross members underneath the car, just like on the video we show, will be dropped down so that you have a bunch of room, and then everything will just be slowly jacked up into place with the rear pin bracket on the rear pins. Line up the studs in the back of the car as you're slowly pulling the jack up. It's very important that you want to wiggle that and make sure that you don't have any binding. They should slide right up onto those. And then you'll put the two nuts on there. And then we have nylon lock nuts that go underneath those as well, just to keep it from vibrating loose. So that's the first step, is just getting the main body attached to the actual trans linkage. Okay, so here's the top support and side support arms. They have 4 bolts here that connect the top arm with the side arms. You want to actually back these out. You actually don't have to remove them completely. You should be able to back them out about maybe 75% of the way, and just get a couple drops of blue Loctite right on the threads. It's actually a good thing to do it this way, because if you pull the whole bolt out, put the Loctite on the threads and push it in, you might get Loctite in the stainless bushings where the rubber isolators are, and that could lock up that if you ever have to take it apart. It's just blue Loctite, so it's not going to be that big of a deal. But you take them out like that, same with the other one. This also helps because when you're working on it, and I'll show you in a second when we get it mounted, you want these spread apart. So if you come up here, you actually have some room to work with on this. They're not locked into place and you're trying to press those things on, okay? So the other thing we want some blue Loctite on, this is the factory 10mm bolt, and that goes into this channel here, just like the factory one did. So what you'll want to do is you'll slide this over. That's why you have to have all this drop down so you have room. You'll slide it over the drive shaft and the shifter, and you'll just line this up, and you'll come in from this side on the passenger side, and you'll want to use a 10mm ratcheting box wrench, because when you're underneath the car, you're only going to have a little bit of room. Now, if you watch this, if you see, you have a little bit of an issue there with it hitting the blue arm. I've actually done it both ways. What I've done is when I got this thing up in there, I've gone ahead and removed the passenger side arm back bolt and tilt it down like that, and you can get some more movement. Or you can take the thing out completely. It's up to you. If you've got the room and you've got it, plus if you have a ratchet that maybe has enough room, but as you can see, if you take that arm out, you have a lot more room to work with to get that tight. Now it will be a little tight getting these back in, so the trick is when you get them in, put the bolts in, slide them up here, because you got to remember you're going to have the tunnel right there. Slide them up here and then just line them up and stick them in. So that's the basic concept. You use whatever your discretion is as far as clearance, how much you want to dick around with trying to get, you know, small fractional turns on the wrench. So I'm not going to turn this completely tight. We're just going to leave, let me back that off actually a little bit. We're going to leave a little bit of play there. This one probably has a little bit too much. Don't need that much. So we have a little bit of play there. Okay? So now this is mounted and it just needs to be lined up. So the next step is we're going to get our bolts and we're going to attach it to the shifter body. So now that we have the bridge connected to the car, we slid it up over the top. I actually took the passenger blue arm off to get that one long bolt that we took out at the top arm assembly. Just makes it easier to use the ratcheting box wrench. And then I reattached it, but I did not tighten these bolts up. These bolts have some blue Loctite on them, but you've got at least 30 minutes to work with, so just don't walk away with them in there, but continue with the process. Okay, now we're going to attach this main support bridge to the main body. If you accidentally push this into gear, front or back, just grab the handle up. You can actually do it from underneath. You can just kind of grab it, make sure that it'll rotate. You can hear it clicking, you know it's in neutral. If it isn't in neutral, you can push the whole body and feel it kind of click, or you can actually very gently get a large blade screwdriver and just push on the back there to pop it that way. But you want to have it in neutral like that, just so it's easier to make sure everything's straight up and down. Now, like I said, most important, 2 bottom holes on both sides. So you can take the whole body and you can just slide it front to back to get those bolts lined up, and then you'd want to obviously lift this up and down and lift the body up and down a little bit. You might have to play around finding that first bolt. We did put large chamfers. If you look here, I put a very large oversized chamfer on that bolt so that when you do get close, it'll kind of seat itself in there, and then you just move it back and forth until you can get it in. And again, make sure you put 2 or 3 full turns in there and put blue Loctite on them. We have lock washers on them, but I always like to put blue Loctite on them as well. So what I like to do is I get one in and get the other one in, and do not tighten these. Just get them started and then go ahead and go to the other side and do the same thing. Once these are lined up, because of how precise this bar is, the other ones you shouldn't even have to hunt. As you can see, I'm doing it blind from the back side. They should slide right in. You shouldn't have any issues there. The first one is going to be the hardest one to line up. Getting some light underneath there would really help. So once those are all in, just like that, blue Loctite on these 2 bolts, these 2 bolts, these 2 bolts, these 2 bolts, and this bolt. And the blue Loctite is provided. You get them all in there like that, and then you can go ahead and start snugging everything up, tighten everything up. Now this one bolt here, you can go ahead and tighten it up when you first put it in. There's no reason to leave that one loose, because now you have the arm on there and it's a pain in the ass to try to get to that bolt. So this bolt tighten up these 4 and these 4. Leave these a little loose until you get those in, and then just work your way around both sides. And once you get them tight, you can see the whole shifter unit is there. We'll go ahead and snug these up. And they are all 1/2-inch heads, which makes it very convenient. You can use a 1/2-inch ratcheting box wrench, or if you have a very compact socket, this might not clear out here. It does clear in here because it comes in a little narrower. But a ratcheting box wrench is the best tool to use. And you want to get on these, but not hard. You just get tight on them. Don't go crazy with it and strip the threads out, because like I said, they have lock washers and blue Loctite on them, so they should stay tight, no problem. Now what we're going to do is we have 4 of these bolts. One thing to note, to make sure you don't screw this up, there are 4 holes on each arm. Okay, you don't use the top 2 holes. I did that because these arms are now symmetrical. It's the same arm for passenger and driver. So as you transfer it to the passenger side, the top holes on this side actually become the bottom holes on the other side. So you'll have 2 holes above here on this arm that don't get used. Same on the passenger side, the top 2. So just keep in mind that you're only bolting, no matter which side you're on, the bottom 2 holes. And you can see the threaded holes in the body are right there and right there. So having a good lighting in here, it really helps. You want to just pull the whole assembly. And as you can see, you can just slide it back and forth. You slide it and get them lined up. And then you just kind of push up on it, pull down on the arm like that, and get them started. Once you get one on each side started, obviously the other one will go in really easy because they're precise distance apart. Okay, once we have the arms tight, make sure you get all 8 bolts, 2 on the passenger, or 4 on the passenger, 4 on the driver. Now you want to slide the rear bushing bracket and make sure it's lined up, and it shouldn't bind. See how it's moving very freely just by pushing it up and down. And we're going to go ahead down here and we're going to attach. This is very important. Before you go jacking the transmission back up to get it seated, put the cross member back on, because otherwise you have no idea when you're getting close to it hitting that. You do not want to push the transmission and hit the top of the tunnel and break something. So we're going to go ahead and get the center bolts on first. And we're not going to torque them down tight yet, just get them on there. And see, now you can tell where your gap is, and you can tell when to stop. The other thing you want to do is you want to reach up here, just put your thumb, and as you're jacking the transmission up slowly, you want to continue wiggling it. And the reason you do that is you just want to make sure that nothing's bound. It should be very free. And eventually, hear that? You're tapping the underside. That means you know that it's lined up properly. There we go. So once you have about, I'm actually going to lower this just a hair. Once you have about 1/4 of an inch gap, that's when you want to start your bolts, because you want this transmission to be neutralized. And neutralized means you do not want to jack this thing up tight with the transmission jack and have the transmission pushed to one side or the other, or cocked a little bit and not in its natural setting. And you can see kind of the witness marks where the factory, where it was before we started. Make sure it's not really crooked, because you could get some NVH from that. So we're going to go ahead and get the bolts in with that 1/4 inch gap. And again, just like every bolt on every car you ever do, you really need to start them by hand at least 3 or 4 turns to make sure it's not cross-threaded. And this is another important step, is once we get this done, remember we have that 1/4 inch gap there. You can see it's still moving. We're going to get this in. And now we're going to release the pressure on the transmission and let that just sit naturally on there. And then we're going to bolt it up without the trans being supported. And we're going to torque these, I believe it's about 54 foot-pounds. We're going to go over the 1 to 2 lockout pin setting. This is the same procedure for the MT82 and the GT350 shifter, which is the TR-3160. So we're going to show it on MT82, but it's the exact same process. So basically what you want is you want this pin here to lock against that plate right at the 1 to 2 gate. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be set right here from the factory. What you want to do to test it is you want to go over lightly, make sure it goes into 1 and 2. You also want to push hard and also make sure it goes into 1 and 2, because your shifting, when you're power shifting, is going to be a little bit different. Now, if it was set wrong and it didn't feel quite right, you take a 5/8 wrench and you break that open, and you'll see right here, if you zoom in, there's a hole in the pin. You want to stick the largest Allen wrench you can get in there, and you just want to hold that really tightly while you turn this nylon lock nut that's on the other side. If you zoom in over there, you'll see that one right here. You want to turn this while the pin is held. And we're going to go ahead and set this thing completely off, because if it doesn't work, this is the proper way to set it. You want to turn it all the way in so that it can't get into first or second gear. Okay, so turn it towards the driver's side until it cannot engage first. Then it's as simple as taking the Allen wrench and just turning it clockwise till it can just go in. We'll back it off a little bit till it doesn't go. Again, just to show you. Okay, that doesn't go. So you do it slowly until it can just engage first. There you go. After that, you want to go a full half a turn. Then check it out. Again, hard, soft, and then also reverse. Once that's set, you put this Allen wrench in here, you hold it in place, don't let it move too much, and then tighten up the lock nut on the other side. Once it's locked, you can hold onto the knob and tighten it up like that, and you're all set. Check it again. That's it. All right, this is the supplied MGW inner rubber dust boot. We're going to prep this thing to install it, and I'm going to show you how you do that. But first, I want to just, if you notice that there's like a white powdery residue on the shifter boot, don't be alarmed. That is perfectly normal. That is wax bloom for when they mold it, to remove it from the mold easier. It will flake off after a couple months, but there's no reason for us to remove it because it's harmless. So what we need to do is we need to flip over this back side, and we need to coat this back surface here to make it slippery. Because when we install this shifter onto, or this boot onto the shifter, we're actually going to push it right through the oval cutout, and it'll slide easier. If you don't lubricate this surface, what'll happen is you'll pull this right back off the shifter when you're trying to push it down. You have 3 options here. We actually have some rubber safe grease. This is EPDM, so you need to make sure you use a grease that will not attack the rubber. So you can use that and you can lubricate it. You can also use just general hand soap, dish soap from your kitchen, because it's harmless for the rubber, and you just apply it there. Don't dilute it, actually use it full strength dish soap and just coat the surface. Or lastly, you can actually use a silicone based tire dressing, and we're going to use that on a little paper towel here. Just put a generous amount on there, and what you want to do is you just want to put it all over the outside of this thing, just like that. Put a generous amount on there so when you feel it with your finger, it's very slick like that. And then you actually want to put a little bit inside the hole like that. And then even turning it around, we'll get a little bit more on here. You also want to go ahead and put some, and if you lift up this little lip here, we want to get some all the way around that inside lip. That'll be for later when you go to pull it back up into the console after everything's done. You'll lift this thing and you pull it back up, because this little split here is actually how it seals the tunnel. There's a thin piece of sheet metal, and you actually just pull it up just on this part just to get this lip up. This will remain on the underside of the vehicle, the big larger lip. Just a note also for reference, when you're installing this shift boot, you have an arrow here and here. They are designed to face the rear of the vehicle and the front of the vehicle. Don't have it turned sideways like that, because obviously the oval will not go into the shape of the trans cutout and it won't seal properly. So you want to have that set just like that, with the 2 arrows facing the front and rear. It is symmetrical that way, so it doesn't matter which way you do that. Again, unique with this shifter is how low it sits, and also just, you don't have a lot of clearance here. So when you put this boot on, this is the boot we provide, it's a pain in the ass, but you can do it. Just be patient. What you want to do is you're actually going to reach in the inside and you're going to push that lip around. There's a key cut all the way around the base of the shifter. And you'll put this around it, and you'll reach your fingers in, you'll start with this side, and you'll just work it around. That's the other reason why you still don't want to put the shift knob shaft in. That will be the last thing we do. Once you get the boot secured, now is time to go ahead and put the handle in. Just push it all the way down. And you have 4 1/4-20 flatheads. Now, I've talked about this in previous shifter videos and also swapping out these handles. You have a threaded round cylinder in the center. So when you start to screw one side, it may tighten up, like this one went ahead and tightened up, but if it starts to spin, that's why you get 2 wrenches and you actually start screwing them in from each side so that you're holding the one. And don't go crazy tight on it, but you want to give it a good little twist when you get it locked down. Does not matter what order you do. You can do the top ones or the bottom ones first. Doesn't matter at all. Okay, when you get those tight, carefully, very carefully, just grab a corner of the boot and pull up lightly, because you do not want to pull the boot back off away from the shifter where you spent all that time cussing and cutting your fingers up getting that boot on. So you just want to pull it up, and you want to pull it right up to about there, and then push this thing around. And then MGW provides a zip tie, because if you don't put this zip tie on, this is very important, it will slip up like this when you're shifting, and then you'll hear a lot of wind noise coming in from underneath the car. So you get it right up underneath that little lip right there. And I like to have it at 6 o'clock, just so you can easily see the tail to cut the tail off. Try to get in as close as you can, but obviously don't cut the actual thing.
So basically get it about halfway.
Yeah, and it's not critical. You just don't want it coming over the top so that it has a chance of slipping over and the zip tie just falling off. You want to have it tight against that surface there. A little bit higher won't be an issue, a little bit lower won't be an issue, but you don't want it so low that the boot bunches up, especially where the reverse lockout solenoid is. You don't want that rubber to get in between the pin and the plate. So if it looks like this, also make sure that you take note, I didn't mention this, but the arrows are molded into the boot to tell you 6 o'clock and 12 o'clock. So you can't have the boot sideways, or else the oval of the shape of the boot isn't matching the car, so it won't fit properly. So the factory does provide this foam and heat barrier. You can see it's got a heavy core, but we actually also provide, this is from Dynamic Controls. They're a great company. They specialize in vibration, dampening, and acoustics. This has a good sound and heat barrier. It's laminated like this. It's got little slits in it. You can see the stud sticking up here. So it's designed to go around the oval, and then the studs push down. And make sure that you don't have any of the plugs stuck up underneath of it, like especially the one you have to plug in. And we were talking about this earlier. As you can see, this GT350 had this other plug. That was the second plug, but it's not. We're assuming that may be for the illumination for the cup holders and stuff, but it's not using it, but it's got this one plug. So just make sure they're up so you can grab them when you go to tilt the console back in. And then here's the factory piece. Again, it's got 2 holes in it. Same thing. They're designed to go in right there and right there, and then tuck this underneath those 2 little corners right there. Okay, when the console goes in, very important to have the e-brake up. You should have had it up when we started this to keep the car from rolling, because we're working on this car in neutral. So you just want to carefully guide it in, and make sure that these go up inside here and not get stuck up underneath. Not only could you scratch them, but you just won't get everything lined up. So we'll just push it in softly. Make sure everything's cleared. Pull up on the boot for the e-brake. And then right before you snap everything together, again, either you have one or two. This one we just have the one, but make sure that it, let's see which way I've got it here. Yeah, should go in this way. And make sure you hear a click, like that. If you just push it in and you don't hear it snap, it's not going to get a connection. I think that's, there we go. And you should hear everything snap into place. And there you go. Okay, now we're going to get the two screws back in here to hold the console in, and then pop these little side pads on. I know I sound like a broken record, but please screw these screws in at least 2 or 3 turns by hand. You can cross thread these coarse pitch screws just as easily as a fine pitch one. And don't get really tight on these because it's a plastic bracket. You could crack that thing in a heartbeat. So just use your wrist pressure, get it seated, and then just a little twist, not much at all. Then you take the pad, and you'll see the magnet, and you'll see a little cutaway right there. Line up the shape, magnet snaps in, and then you just tap in the clips, just like that. Okay, we're going to show how to modify the 2015 to present shift boot for the MGW shifter. We do not utilize the factory plastic lift-up ring. Ours is the push-down reverse, so we need to remove this so that we can attach it to our shifter. What you want to do is you want to invert it like this, pull it up. If you look real closely, you have a very distinct shoulder here, right on that line. You have a couple options. If you have access to a little bandsaw, that's the quickest way. You just lay the inside of the blade right there on that surface and cut this part off. Leave all of this collar, as much of it as you can. Or you can take a Dremel tool with a little cutoff blade and just whip it around that outside circumference and it'll pop that off. Or if you don't have either of those, just a little hacksaw will do it, but that'll be a little bit more time consuming. The whole point is to remove it just like this. We just chop this thing off with a bandsaw. Got it off of that surface there, and then if you reach in here, you can easily just slide this part right out. The reason you want to retain that is that the boot is glued to that, and it actually provides structural support. And the boot, as you look at it when you invert it, has a nice little lip in there. MGW will provide this little boot grommet. It's got a groove in it. You'll just work it inside the boot all the way around. And then push it to the inside here. And you'll actually want to get it so it goes all the way around. You see it pop up there like that. Move it around. And there you go. And that snaps into place there. Push it a little bit more here and get that piece over it. And that keeps it in place on the bottom. And then when you invert it back like this, you left it with a really nice closing that is the exact size of the shift knob shaft on the shifter. Okay, here's the modified boot. We cut out the pull-up collar. We put in this provided little grommet to clean it up. Make sure you have all of the tabs here, because when you popped it out, if one of them fell down in there, hopefully you saw it, but make sure you have all the tabs so that thing doesn't rattle loose. Also, I didn't mention it, but this is a little coin tray. Pull this out at the beginning of it so that when you put this on there, you don't trap that up underneath. This is designed with that little clip that you can pull it out easily with the bezel in place. The other thing to be careful of is, and we have had a couple customers do this, they, you know, it's their fault, but they've shared it with us. So we just like to put this in the video. Get the shift knob shaft lined up first and go ahead and push it in like that. Because if you don't have it lined up and you push this down, you'll poke a hole right through the leather boot. So just very gently push down, you'll hear a snap, and then push that shaft down. And it's got a nice snug fit so that if the shift knob, and we're actually going to put a nice weighted gripper that MGW makes. It's got a polymer molded grip so it doesn't get hot or cold, but this is solid stainless steel and this is solid stainless steel there. It weighs ½ a pound. So we'll go ahead and screw it in, and what I like to do is pull that boot up a little bit and then let the shift knob actually push the rubber grommet down as you're bottoming out the shifter. And put a little pressure on here too so you don't twist it like that, because you can also tear the boot. Just put gentle pressure, and it's, as you can see, it's already touching it and it's pushing it down as far as it needs to go until and then obviously the knob stops. We'll back it off, and if you see right here at 12 o'clock, so you don't see it, is the set screw. So we'll back it off like that. We'll pull that up and then get the supplied 1/8" Allen wrench. If I can see, there we go. And just hold it in place. It takes a couple turns to get in there. All right, and once you feel it start to get tight, that's when you hold on to the knob, just to make sure it doesn't turn a little bit so the logo's still lined up. There you go. And now, last thing you'll want to do is put the little coin tray in. As you can see now, the tab's there, so you can easily pull it out to clean it.